Propagandists and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials and the Millennial. Joining me today is Garrick Ross and, of course, Warren Miller. Welcome back.
Garrick and the Boomers.
Garrick and the Boomers. And, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our assistant producer, and Adam Cantora, our producer. So the podcast is called Biden Propagandists, and that's because it's not just the media that's being the propagandists, but, of course, now we have Obama, who's endorsing Joe Biden. It's finally happened. Finally happened.
8 months later.
It's right. He waited until everybody's out of the race. Obama did. And, of course, Bernie just endorsed Biden. We haven't heard from some other the candidates who were in the race. They haven't necessarily, like Elizabeth Warren.
She
hasn't endorsed him. Mm-hmm. But we do have a couple of quick clips, and this will set up what this election is going to be about. The general election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, it's pretty clear what it's going to be about. It's all about the pandemic and propaganda about what you did or didn't do. And here is the first clip.
Joe helped me manage H1N1 and prevent the Ebola epidemic from becoming the type of pandemic we're seeing now.
Yeah, so that's Biden saying, Joe helped me with the H1N1 virus when we were president, and that's why he's competent to be able to be president and beat Donald Trump. It's already setting it up, right?
And that's why we had plenty of ventilators stockpiled from the H1N1 crisis. And
masks.
PPE and masks. It seems like Joe fell asleep at the switch on that one.
Yes, he did. And he managed it. He apparently managed the crisis, according to Obama. The H1N1 and what was the other one? Ebola,
SARS.
Right? And SARS.
SARS.
I mean, they had a lot of things going on there, but they're setting it up. And here is from Obama's endorsement, the second clip. Listen to this.
I could not be prouder of the incredible progress that we made together during my presidency. But if I were running today, I wouldn't run the same race or have the same platform as I did in 2008.
Because I have no convictions.
The world is different. There's too much unfinished business for us to just look backwards. We have to look to the future. Bernie understands that, and Joe understands that.
So this reminds me of South Park, way back in the day when you had South Park, of course, and Obama was running his first election, and they had a South Park episode where everybody was going, change, 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 and they didn't really, that was the buzzword that everybody was using. And of course, now the buzzword is we need to move forward. We need to have progress.
Unfinished business.
Unfinished business. But he wouldn't run the same campaign, Warren. Obama, if he were running now, he wouldn't run the same campaign because, and as far as I'm concerned, he has no convictions anyway. He would run a different campaign.
Well, you'd have to, because what he did for the 8 years he was president didn't work.
Clearly.
I mean, we had one of the slowest recoveries in the history of the nation from the mess that he kind of made worse.
True.
He chased many businesses to China. And that's part of the reason we're in the quagmire we're in today. We don't have drug manufacturing here. We don't have medical device manufacturing. All these key essential things we had before Barack Obama was president are gone now.
It's interesting. So you really set this up perfectly, Warren. The last clip from Obama's endorsement of Joe Biden. Joe Biden, Obama basically talks about, government is really necessary. And this pandemic tells you why government is necessary. And but what he never really does, Obama, in his endorsement, is actually call out the Chinese. And this is what blows me away with the Democrat Party. It's always the Republican Party that's causing the problems, but the real problem was caused by the Chinese. But they can't do that. And I've never been able to figure out why. So here's this clip. You have to listen to this to believe it. Here's the clip.
Pandemics have a way of cutting through a lot of noise and spin to remind us of what is real and what is important. This crisis has reminded us that government matters. It's reminded us that good government matters, that facts and science matter, that the rule of law matters, that having leaders who are informed and honest and seek to bring people together rather than drive them apart, those kind of leaders matter. In other words, elections matter. Right now, we need Americans of goodwill to unite in a great awakening against a politics that too often has been characterized by corruption, carelessness, self-dealing, disinformation, ignorance, and just plain meanness.
So we played that whole clip intentionally because it tells you Obama, first of all, he's a brilliant communicator because he really doesn't say anything, of course. And what he should be saying is, hey, during my 8 years, we oversaw some of the most massive exporting of American jobs to China in American history. But Donald Trump's the problem. It's the guy with the orange hair. I mean, essentially, that's what he's saying. I need the millennial and Warren comment on this. Some interesting.
There was another clip in that his endorsement speech that really caught me, and it is where you say he's talking about a lot, but he's not talking about anything at all. And he said that, you know, for the second time in 12 years, we need to fix the economy, as if, you know, and again, it's like putting this blame on Trump, putting this blame on Republicans, and just, you know, trying to assign it in an electoral sense where somehow, you know, the market collapse of '08, which, I mean, I would disagree that was even a Republican administration's fault, like that Bush had anything to do with that, is somehow anything like this, you know, this health-based global pandemic caused, you know, slowdown that we're experiencing right now. And it's more of this blame being assigned that has no merit for any reason at all. Sure.
I mean, it makes perfect sense that, of course, Obama would endorse Biden and naturally talk about Warren, how, you know, the Republicans are responsible for the economy tanking. We already know what the election's going to be about, right? It's going to be about, of course, because Obama has framed it. First, about Trump's response to the pandemic, and secondly, about the fact that Republicans keep crashing the economy.
So two things. People forget that the Democrats took over Congress 2 years before the market crashed.
And Bush warned them about the housing
bubble. To blame
bubble.
President Bush solely is revisionist history. But to your point, you know, the rhetoric of Obama just doesn't match the record of Obama. He is somebody that has been very divisive.
Yes, he has.
And he did a lot to harm this nation before he left.
And he's talking
along
about,
with Joe Biden.
Absolutely.
And he's talking about the rule of law as if somehow, you know, Democrat governors across the country have a monopoly on, you know, good governance in the face of the law, where we've seen in several states and talked about it here on this podcast that they've kind of thrown caution to the wind and been very, you know, authoritarian in some of their policy making when it comes to what you can and can't do during this time for no logical merit other than to say that they can do it.
We know what's interesting too is Obama mentioned in that last clip he used the word progress, and that was, in my opinion, to appeal to the Bernieites. Yeah. Because, of course, progressives, and Obama's a progressive naturally. I mean, I believe for many years that he's more than a progressive. He's a full-blown socialist and Marxist. That's what I've always believed. But that's just my opinion. But Obama mentioned the word progress because they're trying to appeal to the millennials who love Bernie Sanders. Yeah. Because they need the right, millennials are all about the buzzwords, you know, change, progress.
Oh, yeah.
Bad orange man.
Yeah.
You can comment on that, millennial.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I mean, there's a good number of polling out there that indicates that Bernie's people aren't this shoo-in, as we saw in 2016 as well, to vote for whoever the Democrat nominee is.
They may not vote at all.
And they may not vote at all. And if they do vote, there's a good chance that they might vote for Trump because they see him as the, you know, the grenade or the cog in the wrench that, you know, is looking for the type of change.
You actually think they would vote? You think millennials that voted for Bernie would vote for Trump?
There was a good number in 2016 of Bernie's people who actually came out and voted for Trump because they don't really care about the ideology so much as they care about seeing everything burn. You know, they want some kind of change. They want some kind of outsider to kind of throw everything on its head and get rid of the status quo.
Interesting.
Well, and I think the feeling was stronger in 2016 because they felt the election was stolen from them by Hillary.
Yeah.
They had the DNC organized in the primary working against.
I could see the same argument happen here again, though. I mean, if you looked at Bernie was well ahead going into Super Tuesday, and next thing you know, 4 Democratic establishment candidates drop out, all endorse Biden, and, you know, basically just handed him the nomination. You can see a lot of people having that same sentiment, or another year again, you know, their voice was not heard and the DNC didn't care and they gave it to somebody else who I would agree with a lot of their sentiment that probably really doesn't deserve it, who hasn't done anything of substance to campaign, has really just kind of put his name on a ballot and walked around spitting gibberish.
You know, so the podcast is called Biden Propagandists. You would expect Obama to be a propagandist for Biden, but we know what you wouldn't expect. Well, maybe you would. It's the media that they're being propagandists for Joe Biden, to literally trying to not just kind of endorse him indirectly, but also setting the stage for the November election, which Obama just set the stage in his endorsement. The media is doing the work for them. And we have that information in the very last press conference the President of the United States just had, whereby the media just attacked him nonstop about why didn't you do something sooner? And then at the same time, the media is saying, by media, by the way, we're talking about CNN and MSNBC and ABC and CBS and NBC, what a surprise. You really aren't going to believe how this attack has gone after the president. So what he did is the president put up a slideshow at the beginning of his press conference, and it's a slideshow and it's a timeline slideshow. Here's when the President of the United States and his pandemic task force, his coronavirus task force, took action. And it's a timeline, and the president did that to set the record straight. Well, CNN and MSNBC cut away.
Oh, man.
They completely cut away when these, can you believe that? Since when does the media do that? They cut away from a press conference during a pandemic because they didn't like the fact that the President of the United States was setting the record straight on the timeline, and then went forward and basically put a chyron up saying, President is showing information, about the timeline. But they wouldn't even air it.
It's funny you say that.
You couldn't even hear it.
It's funny you say that because in the endorsement video for Biden, there's a point where Obama says that, we're going against a well-funded and, mean enemy who also has the news on his side, talking about Fox News. And he's saying that they have no concept of the truth and that they'll say whatever. And to me, it's just funny because, like, as you're saying, it ignores the fact that he has on his side, Biden and Obama, that is, every other major establishment news network and, print news edition.
Every single one.
CNBC, MSNBC, CNN, Wall Street Journal, not Wall Street Journal, they're pretty fair, to be honest with you, but the Times, Washington Post, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
And it's just like, I'm sure we'll see some clips about it, but like they're, it's just not, it's not true. And, it's part of this narrative, and it's, putting this all out there that somehow like Trump has, this media elite company running all this deference to him. Meanwhile, CNN and MSNBC pull stunts like you just talked about.
It's incredible. By the way, what CNN and MSNBC did by cutting away from a press conference and putting up a chyron and having basically black screen, that is the equivalent of what you would see in a communist society and a Marxist society. That's what you would expect from China.
Yeah, China does that. If anything happens on the TV that they don't want, they just cut off to it.
And so here's President Trump talking at his press conference about the chain of events. We have a brief clip on that, and here it is.
7 cases were on January 31st. Now, on January 21st, there was a case. Not one person had died. You heard that, Steve, right? Not one person. So we have this massive country, the United States of America. We have the greatest economy in the world, bigger than China's by a lot, right? Because of what we've done over the last 3.5 years. Prior to the virus, but including the virus. So we have the biggest economy, the greatest economy we've ever had, the highest employment numbers, the best employment numbers, best unemployment numbers also, the best of everything. So on January 31st, think of it, not one person has died, not one.
Not one individual had died in the United States of America. And the reason why the President of the United States was talking about the timeline at his press conference is because CNN and MSNBC and ABC and NBC in particular were saying to him, why didn't you shut things down sooner? And meaning, in other words, why didn't you shut down the United States economy in January? And the president's like, nobody had died as of January 31st. Nobody. So I'm supposed to shut down the world's largest economy because no one died? Because you're telling me that I'm supposed to do that?
And going back to our earlier conversation, when did Barack Obama close the economy down for H1N1?
He didn't.
When did Joe Biden close it down?
They did not.
When did the media ask them why they weren't closing things down?
Never did.
Never.
That's the propaganda portion. They're willing to go after this president from a false perspective. And the perspective is attack him, attack him, attack him, whether the attack makes sense or not. Whereas they weren't willing to do this for former presidents.
Ever. And they're setting up, through their propaganda, Warren, as you just said, the media is setting up the campaign for 2020 for Joe Biden because that's all they have. Go ahead.
It's funny you say that because today is April 15th, right? And we're talking about all the economic damage.
You mean it's tax day?
It is tax day.
No!
If we run in a normal timeline. But unfortunately, tax day is now in June, so you'll have that to look forward to. But anyways, it's April 15th, and we've basically been in this lockdown for 3 to 4 weeks, depending on who you are. And think about all the probably the unfixable economic damage that has been done from 1 month of having the economy shut down. Could you imagine the expedited damage that would have happened? I think it would have probably been far worse for the economy and for people's lives if we had shut it down in January for this prolonged quarter, for a whole quarter. Mm-hmm. If we'd have heeded these warnings and done the things that the media thought we should do, as if somehow there's some expert with this God complex that they're always right. But it would have been so much worse than it is now, and we've only been experiencing these kind of catastrophes economically in a month.
So interestingly enough, as you recall, the media initially said hydroxychloroquine wasn't going to work, and how dare the President of the United States even talk about the fact that this medication, along with the Z-Pack, combined together, that they could be used to combat this virus, to keep people off ventilators, because obviously once you're on a ventilator, there's the strong possibility that you're never going to get off.
It's about 50-50.
Which is awful. And just, for the podcast listeners out there, I just talked to the hospital administrator in my county, and the hospital administrator in my county said the same thing, which is hydroxychloroquine actually works. And the hospital, he said, we're actually knowing how to treat this virus so that people don't get on ventilators, which is the whole idea. But the media spent a month basically hitting the President of the United States saying, how dare you put a drug out there that's untested for this particular virus because you're going to kill people. And now they've switched, because that hasn't worked, by the way, and they've completely pivoted to, wow, the President of the United States, you just didn't act in time. You didn't do enough in January. The President answered that. And then CNN, of course, and MSNBC went to dark screen. Mm-hmm. And then we have CNN with John King and Wolf Blitzer talking to John King. And they're talking about how the President is doing this and talking about the timeline. And this has never happened before in American history, that the President is being a propagandist. And we have a clip on this. And here it is.
Thousands of lives by
time that you bought. The argument is that you bought yourself some time. You didn't use it to prepare hospitals. You didn't use it to ramp up testing. Right now,
you're so disgraceful. It's so disgraceful the way you say that. Let me just listen. I just went over it.
Or this rant supposed to make people
I just went over it
in an unprecedented crisis.
So there you have it. So actually, I set that clip up improperly. That was, by the way, CNN, but it was CNN reporter talking over the president and saying tens of thousands of people are dead. And at the same time, we have 20 million people unemployed. In other words, she's contradicting herself. She's saying, why are there so many dead people? Why are there so many unemployed people? So he's darned if he does, he's darned if he doesn't, right?
Well, they love putting him in a box. And remember, he's the one that took all the heat from the media for shutting down flights from China and shutting down flights from Europe and England and Scotland and Ireland. I mean, he took the heat for doing that. That was a bad decision.
And he was called a racist?
He was called a racist.
And then now apparently he didn't test enough people. Meanwhile, our curve for rate of testing has been about as good, or if not better, than most of the countries who had, entered this circumstance around the same time we did.
I just can't tell you how much worse this would have been if he hadn't taken those actions.
Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind. But the CNN reporter, I mean, to have heard that and watched that clip, and I'm glad that podcast listeners, if you didn't get a chance to see the press conference, that you're getting a chance to hear and see these clips, because this reporter was talking over him while he's trying to answer the reporter saying, if there are no deaths in January, then why on earth would I shut down the world's largest economy? And she's like, but there are tens of thousands of people that are died and 20 million people unemployed. Well, he just said, why would he have shut down the economy? Because then we'd probably have 40 million people unemployed. We would be in a Great Depression not seen in American history, much greater than the Great Depression of the 1920s. So unfair. They're propagandists, and they're setting up the stage for Joe Biden.
And she acts like, if in a second's notice, Trump and the CDC and FDA can just pop out a magical test and, distribute it across the country. I mean, these things take time to develop. I mean, without Trump's, deregulation on a lot of these government bureaucracies, we probably would have had to wait a lot longer to have developed a lot of the technology to test and kind of get in front of the coronavirus issues that we have now.
It's true. And here is the same reporter going after President Trump and talking about Biden's criticism of Trump during the China travel ban. We have this clip, and here it is.
Complete gap.
On January 30th.
What did your administration do in February with the time that your travel ban got
A lot. A lot. And in fact, we'll give you a list. What we did, in fact, part of it was up there. We did a lot. Look. You know you're a fake. You know that. The whole network, the way you cover it, is fake. And most of you, and not all of you, but the people are wise to you. That's why you have a lower approval rating than you've ever had before, times probably 3. And when you ask me that question, let me ask you this: why did Biden apologize? Why did he write a letter of apology? No, that's very important. Why did the Democrats think that I acted too quickly? You know why? Because they really thought that I acted too quickly.
And so there she said, well, it doesn't matter whether Biden apologized. People don't care about that. What they care about is that tens of thousands of people have died and that 20 million people are unemployed in the economy, literally arguing and debating as if she is taking the place of Joe Biden on stage and debating in a presidential debate instead of being a reporter.
Yeah, it was kind of shocking to watch. Now I tend to usually, I think different from some people, give the media as much, leeway to do what the media does and tend not to be, very disgusted by what they do. But it's gotten to a point
what's the millennial
this
perspective on this? I want to hear this. I mean, do you guys?
I think it has reached a point to me where I am kind of just fed up with watching these primetime news networks, and these cable news networks kind of cover this because it's so predictable at this point. There's always some slant. There's always some angle. There's always, like, Warren said, damned if you do, damned if you don't. They're just going to always find something to kind of just take a knife and stab you in the back with it. And it's so tiring. It's like, why do I want to keep watching this news over and over and over again? And it's noticeable. The slants are noticeable. Like, early on, I could understand with certain policy issues why they would frame things in certain ways. But it's like, at this point, what purpose does it serve other than just being combative for the sake of being combative?
But they're not interested in getting information, Warren. I mean, if you really were interested in getting information and you were that reporter, you would be asking the President of the United States, Mr. President, what were your advisors, Fauci and Dr. Birx, what were those two doctors saying to you in the month of January with respect to shutting the economy down? What were they telling you? What were they advising you to do? Understanding, Mr. President, that there were no cases in the month and there were no deaths in the month of January. What would they advise?
We talked about it last podcast. I mean, when we showed the clip, Fauci came out and said there's no reason for anybody to change their lives or the way they're going about business, because back then we didn't believe it was going to be as big an issue as it is now. And this isn't just, Trump with this idea. It is literally every infectious disease expert at the CDC, headed by Fauci and his team, who said that this was not going to be what it turned into. And people were operating under that presumption. And, somehow we have to keep going back and re-adjudicating decisions made that have no bearing on anything we can do right now to go forward. Stop living in the past. We have an issue. Let's fix it, but let's stop going back and trying to adjudicate something that a lot of people tended to agree was the right thing to do.
And all that may be so, Garrick, but the problem is that the press isn't interested in ascertaining that information. They're constantly asking these questions about their gotcha questions. Why didn't you shut the economy down and so forth? And basically she's saying, well, tens of thousands of people have died. And you can see what they're interested in doing. They're really not interested in healing the country or moving forward or asking critical questions. And by the way, I think it's a good thing that you have a press that wants to ask questions that are difficult,
and
that are critical.
Yep.
But this particular reporter and many of the reporters, they're just completely debating the President of the United States.
And so, number one, she's vying to be Joe Biden's press secretary.
No way.
That's absolutely what she's doing.
You think so?
Oh, yeah. I'll take the tough questions now and apply for the job when he gets elected, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what a lot of them do. It wouldn't surprise me at all. But above and beyond that, just this whole media narrative of scaring the living daylights out of people. I mean, I can't tell you how many people reach out to me and they're scared. They don't know what's going to happen with their business. They don't know what's going to happen with their job. They don't know if they're getting unemployment insurance or a small business loan or whatever. They don't know if it's going to be enough to keep them going. So I think it's reprehensible that the media is feeding on this fury to blame, but then also spread these wildfires of this is never going to end. This pandemic's never going to end. It's the ruination of America.
And he's making all these wrong decisions, and we're never going to come out on the other side of this.
Why anybody in their right mind would continue to listen to these media sources when this is what they do nonstop is just unbelievable.
But see, I believe, I have a perspective on this too. First of all, I agree completely. My perspective on these press conferences is that as a country, this is how we teach people to be critical thinkers about an industry, which is journalism, that has been utterly corrupted in the United States of America. And this president is actually teaching journalism 101 for future professors, hopefully across America, whereby they can just say, hey, look, if you really want to be a journalist and you really care about being a journalist, you're not supposed to debate the politician. You're supposed to ask questions, then follow up with those questions. By all means, make the questions as tough as you want, but don't talk over the politician. Don't debate the politician, ask the questions and report what has happened, and that's it. Don't try to be the news.
Yeah, you want to have an agenda. Keep your agenda in the article or in the story on the news or whatever show you're on. Don't bring it into the briefing because there's people are watching. They're trying to get information. They're trying to know what's happening from their government, from the government, and all you listen to is these reprehensible arguments that turn people off. And why would they want to watch the rest of it if this is all the argument is?
So this podcast, as you guys know, is called Biden Propagandists. And by the way, you heard some clips of the perfect propaganda from the media. Of course, you would expect propaganda from a politician like Barack Obama, and you heard that as well, and that's fair. But now we have CNN's Wolf Blitzer asking John King his opinion about the Trump press conference, and they basically talk about how what Trump did was propaganda. But meanwhile, CNN and MSNBC, of course, cut away from the press conference because they wouldn't show the slideshow. So here is the clip.
And then I stayed on through the George W. Bush administration. That was propaganda. That was not just a campaign video. That was propaganda aired at taxpayer expense in the White House briefing room. And it was selective cherry-picking information. Again, the president has every right to be proud of imposing the travel restrictions on China. He was criticized by other people at the time, and it turns out every public health expert will now tell you that helped. That helped. That was the one thing the president did early on.
So there you have John King talking to Wolf Blitzer about what the president did was propaganda with these slides and the timeline of the president and the coronavirus task force and how they responded accordingly. But meanwhile, they're not addressing the fact that they wouldn't even cover those slides because it was propaganda, and also setting up what I view as a campaign finance violation by saying the president had staff which are paid for by the government prepare these slides when they shouldn't have because it was pure campaigning versus, well, look, if you're the president of the United States and you have a media that keeps asking you the same question over and over again, why didn't you act sooner? Why didn't you act sooner? So forth. Why are there 20 million people unemployed? What did you know and when did you know it? At some point, you have to respond, and he just did it with a slideshow.
Must never have heard of the bully pulpit. I mean, the president has every right to go up there and say whatever he wants to whoever he wants about whatever he wants. And for the media to say that as some arbiter that, the president can't address certain questions and can't, display certain information is just, to me, asinine.
Exactly. And here, by the way, we have John King once again talking about how what President Trump did is a new low. The CNN of all people saying what the president of the United States did is a new low. And here is the clip.
When the president was asked by CNBC, is there going to be a pandemic? No, not at all. That was the president of the United States on January 22nd. The president in early February said, looks like in April, in theory, it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away. The president said then on February 26th at the White House, this is the flu, this is like the flu. He said in that same press conference, we're going to get very substantially 15 people, 15 within a couple of days, it's going to be down to 0. I could go on and on and on, Wolf, with other things the president has said. Again, he has every right to defend himself. He has every right to push back. He has every right to challenge things that are factually not true. But to play a propaganda video at taxpayer expense in the White House briefing room
expense
is a new, you can insert your favorite word here, in this administration.
There you go. So John King basically saying it's a new, you can insert your own word. What he meant to say, of course, it's a new low. And of course said that President Trump was creating propaganda. And then CNN decided to reset the stage with their own timeline of what exactly happened, which is, by the way, which isn't true. And look, when all this is over, Warren, as a country, clearly we're going to look inward and find out, what did we do wrong? Did we overreact? And where did we overreact, everywhere or just in certain places? How should we do this differently? Why aren't we prepared? All of the normal questions you should ask. But of course, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and CNN is all in on trying to wreak havoc with the American people. They want this guy to fail. They want this president to fail, which means they want America to fail.
Well, and it's why people are stopping watching CNN. I mean, they're losing viewer. I mean, the strategy they have, they used to be, when I was younger, when I was your age, I listened to CNN. That was our
Garrick, the millennial.
Garrick. I mean, that was our news source.
Yeah.
When in the 80s and 90s, that's the only place you went. That was your news source.
Because it was 24/7 worldwide.
And maybe the Washington Post. I mean, those were the things you read when I was young.
Yeah, even MSNBC does better these days than CNN does.
Got to tell you, in the last 10 years, the number of times I've had to watch CNN because it's on in a hotel or it's on at an airport or something are rare, and most of the time I take what they say is not the truth.
Which is incredible. Why is CNN on in airports everywhere? Why is that the case?
Because you know what, I will say, when I grew up, it was always explained to me how the media works on cable news. It was Fox is the right-leaning show, MSNBC is the left-leaning show, and CNN is the middle.
The center,
is the center. But lately, I've noticed, I think everybody's noticed that CNN just has an agenda, and it just depends on what year you're in, what they're going for. I mean, now it's anti-Trump, pretty pro-Biden. But in the past, I can definitively remember in the first term of Obama where CNN was predictably very anti-Obama, anti-everything he was about. And then, around the second term, when popularity for Obama began to skyrocket, they flipped on their head and just went right after, every Republican.
Clearly, a lot of this has to do with the producer and the ownership of CNN and so forth. I mean, obviously, you get a political person in charge of a newsroom and all honesty goes out the door. It doesn't really matter. But, John King, he just said that it's propaganda, what Trump did, and of course CNN being, the real neutral host here. Well, here's the thing. The media spent that entire press conference saying that the President of the United States did nothing during the month of February. So the President did explain what happened in the month of January. Obviously, what happened from that point forward is they were really having a lot of serious meetings in February and deciding how we're going to deal with this. And rather than having the podcast go through the timeline, we have an actual clip from Dr. Fauci that occurred on February 29th on OAN, February 29th, the last day of February. And you have to hear this clip. This is one of the persons that is the key persons providing the President of the United States information on how he should respond. And here's Dr. Fauci. Here's the clip.
So, Dr. Fauci, it's Saturday morning in America. People are waking up right now with real concerns about this. They want to go to malls and movies, maybe the gym as well. Should we be changing our habits, and if so, how?
No, right now, at this moment, there is no need to change anything that you're doing on a day-by-day basis. Right now, the risk is still low, but this could change. I've said that many times, even on this program. You've got to watch out because although the risk is low now, you don't need to change anything you're doing. When you start to see community spread, this could change and force you to become much more attentive to doing things that would protect you from spread.
So there you have it. That's February 29th, guys. And the media is hyper-focused on the President of the United States saying, why don't you do anything? His own people are saying, continue to live your life the way you normally do it. However, we're still looking at this very closely. Maybe take some more cautions. What am I missing? I mean, why is the media still doing this? I mean, why isn't someone just covering this and playing this over and over again?
Because they value their message and their fear-mongering and everything else and their assistance of Vice President Joe Biden to be president. They feel that's job one.
No doubt.
Truth and reality don't matter in this context.
I mean, this is from Fauci's own mouth, these words are. I mean, this is what blows me away. And that the fact that the President of the United States had to put up a slideshow showing how their response took place and when, and a timeline. And then meanwhile, he's got the top doctor in the Oval Office right there with him saying, as of February 29th, we don't really need to change anything. Go ahead, Garrick.
For reference, we live in Maryland here, and probably one of the more dense Northeast states. We didn't have our first case for nearly a week and a half, 2 weeks after that time. I wasn't sent home from work until a week after that. It was still pretty up in the air how big of a deal this was going to be. And while we compare all we want, there wasn't anything readily available information-wise to tell us what to do or how bad this was going to be. Because we all have to remember, China was not open and transparent. And, I know Trump's trying to, have some good relationship with them going forward so we can deal with this together. But nobody knew because China wasn't letting us know. And it didn't come here, and China didn't stop, close their air traffic and everything after that, or they kept it in the dark for 6 days. And they let their people run around, fly internationally, come to the United States, go to Europe and all this, and then now we're dealing with the fallout of that. It's hard to blame this on Trump when there is a big elephant in the room who's the reason we're at where we're at.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. Any final thoughts on that with the media propagandists there, Warren?
I guess propagandists do what propagandists do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So next up, we have the dumbest bill in America. It's the dumbest bill in America. And Mr. Assistant Producer, what do we have for the lead up? Let's hear it.
Dum 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 dum.
And the dumbest bill in America is no excuse absentee voting in the state of Virginia, because the state of Virginia was flipped from red to blue, and that's both houses, the House and the Senate, and of course the governor is an idiot. But we'll go into that in a minute. So no excuse absentee voting was just passed in the state of Virginia. The governor just signed that a few days ago, but it was introduced in January, just to let you guys know, before the pandemic was actually an issue. And as you might expect, no excuse absentee voting is what all the Democrats want nationwide now in November. Suddenly, they want no excuse absentee voting. Hear this. In the Wall Street Journal, just a couple days ago, there was an article entitled, "Heed Jimmy Carter on the Danger of Mail-in Voting." Heed Jimmy Carter on the danger of mail-in voting. And it says the following: absentee ballots remain the largest source of potential voter fraud. This is Jimmy Carter. That quote isn't from President Trump, who criticized mail-in voting this week after Wisconsin Democrats tried and failed to change an election at the last minute into an exclusively mail-in affair. It's the conclusion instead of the bipartisan 2005 report of the Commission on Federal Election Reform, chaired by former President Jimmy Carter and former Secretary of State James Baker III. Again, President Jimmy Carter and former Secretary of State James Baker chaired that commission, and they came to the conclusion that absentee ballots remain the single largest source of potential voter fraud. Yet, Virginia just passed no excuse absentee voting, and the Democrats nationwide want no excuse absentee voting in November. Thoughts on this, Warren? You know a lot about this subject, I know.
Well, it's a great way to get rid of a president you don't like. I mean, there are many safeguards built into our voting system, and they exist for a reason. They exist so that the workers there don't manipulate votes, so that people taking care of the elderly aren't voting for them in a different way than the elderly think they should vote. I mean, there are many safeguards that we've enacted over the years. The Democrats conveniently call these blockages to allowing people to vote. But let's face it, if you're in this country illegally, should you have a right to vote? I don't think so. If you're attempting to manipulate elections and you want to vote 40 times, you want to show up with a tub of ballots and try to manipulate or even change ballots, which is what recently happened in one place, that stuff's all illegal. And it's illegal for a reason. So it becomes much harder when you do a large-scale mail-in election. You're getting rid of all your poll workers that are looking for fraud. You're getting rid of a bunch of layers of protection. And unfortunately, one party in this nation likes to cheat.
There's no doubt in my mind.
Time and again. And so, yes, they want a system where they can determine an outcome. And that's what's going to happen.
And here's media propagandist Brian Williams of MSNBC.
Always a reliable source, that guy.
Asking Dr. Fauci, Dr. Fauci, whose expertise is on infectious diseases, he asks Dr. Fauci about voting by mail. I mean, this is why Fauci, I think, almost got fired by Trump and might actually get fired at some point in the future, because he's going on these programs and he's being asked questions he knows he's making himself vulnerable that have nothing to do with fixing the pandemic, but it has everything to do with the election. Here's Brian Williams, and here's the clip.
If you had your way, and I know November to a lot of people seems like a long time from now, would people in all 50 states have the right and ability to vote by mail?
Brian, that's not my area of expertise. I would hope that by November we would have things under such control that we could have a real degree of normality. That's my interest in my job as a public health person.
So Brian Williams is probably going, darn it, I can't believe that he said that. I mean, I tried to put him in a corner and I couldn't get it from him because the media wants vote-in by mail so badly. And of course, Ralph Northam just signed the bill, naturally, because now in Virginia, you don't need a reason to not show up. You don't need to present yourself. You don't even need to present ID. You can just send in by mail, your absentee ballot.
And that bill comes with a side of ranked choice voting. They just signed that into law in Virginia too. So if anybody knows how that system works, it's another really weird one. Is basically you mark a couple of choices on your ballot in order of how you prefer them, and it basically works like a runoff. And first across always wins, but then if not, they'll bring your second choice into your first, and then the math gets kind of fuzzy. And there's been some instances where calculations have been wrong, especially in Europe where they do this. And so, this is just what they're trying to do. Any way that they can kind of, get an advantage, they're going for it.
So this brings up a whole nother point. Now, Virginia's one thing because their legislature passed a bill.
Yes.
And they enacted it. But there are some states, including our own, that are talking about doing this without a bill, without a law. So, technically the governor is required to follow the laws of the state. And if the law says you have to have a primary on a set date or a general election on a set date, that law generally determines that you have a traditional election. You show up and you vote at your school or your community center. We have governors acting as legislatures.
Yeah.
And they're violating the state constitution, if not the federal constitution, doing this.
And that also brings up another point. You talked about different states doing different things. The federal bureaucracy does not have sweeping authority to implement vote by mail constitutionally. I mean, elections are dictated and run by the state at a state-by-state case. And so, you're going to have states like Wyoming, Montana, Missouri, these Republican places, which would probably never do vote by mail because it's just not necessary or feasible for them. But, you're going to try to make places like California and New York do it. And, that's up to them because I personally believe, each state should be left up to do its own thing, as long as they do it constitutionally.
Federalism.
But, this idea that this national vote by mail thing is going to happen in November, to me, is just unpractical.
And as Warren said, that you could be a governor and you could use the pandemic as an excuse to bypass the legislature and just decree we're going to have vote by mail.
Yeah, governors are going to be kings.
Yes, absolutely. And so here's Ralph Northam, of course, who signed the no excuse absentee voting bill. Here's Governor Ralph Northam talking about no excuse absentee voting in his State of the State speech in January. And he says government shouldn't have to okay your reason for voting early. A nice little line, but of course, as we will talk about after the clip, we know it's not true. And here's the clip.
So we should do two things. One, no excuse is required to vote absentee. The government shouldn't have to okay your reason for needing to vote early.
Yes, the government shouldn't have to okay your reason, so you don't need voter ID. The way it works is you have the ballot mailed to you, you fill it out, and if you're elderly, someone could fill it out for you. You could have someone else sign it.
Ballot harvesting.
Ballot harvesting. Explain what ballot harvesting is, guys, and why this is so dangerous.
So basically, you have a person who goes door to door, and they pick up ballots on behalf of the candidates and people who they have reliably viewed as their supporters, and they make sure that you get out to vote. And so you can have one person, collecting 100 absentee ballots and knocking on their door, making sure that their person filled it out.
Interesting. And so, by the way, we know that what Ralph Northam has done in Virginia, signing this bill, we now know that this is what the Democrat Party wants nationwide. They want to cheat. And why? Because here is the media asking DNC Chairman Tom Perez, he's the national chairman of the Democrat National Committee, should we be voting by mail? And this just happened. And here is the clip.
Themselves in harm's way. We need in the next stimulus bill to make sure that there's additional resources for states so that there is a choice for voters this November, if we need to, that they can vote by mail. And there are some really important principles, Willie, making sure that as long as it is postmarked by Election Day, it is okay. Number two, making sure that it is a stamp with it so that it doesn't cost the voter anything, making sure that we don't allow states to use the so-called signature matching requirements to say that a number of ballots will not be allowed. We can do vote by mail. We are already doing it across this country. And to state otherwise is just absolutely a load of you-know-what.
Did you hear that? He literally said, the DNC chair said, that we shouldn't require signatures to have to be matched with the people who cast the ballot by mail and the signature that is on file at the election board where you registered to vote and signed your name. We shouldn't have to match those either. What? What? I mean, Warren, help me out on this.
Well,
I can't believe he said it.
You know, when you don't like the rules of the game, you change them. And that's exactly what's going on here. You know, we've all played Monopoly with somebody that has a different set of rules than everybody else. And you can read to them what the rules say. They don't want to play by those rules. And that's exactly what the DNC is doing. They don't like the rules of elections. They don't like the safeguards that are in place. They want them all removed so they can determine an outcome before the election occurs.
Sounds just like, a communist society, basically. In the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, of course, they would have elections, but it was all a sham, naturally, because everybody voted for the same person. There was never one person that didn't, and so it was such a joke. And obviously that's what the Democrats want too. But the fact that the DNC chair would say that I don't think it's necessary that we should have to match your signature with the signature that's on file means he's basically saying we want to cheat.
To me, it's funny because he said he wanted to do it in the stimulus. So basically, he's saying he wants to hold federal assistance hostage unless each state implements vote by mail.
Exactly. So, no excuse absentee voting by Virginia Governor Ralph Northam. That is the dumbest bill in America. So, just to have a little bit of fun with Ralph Northam, the governor of Virginia, remember back in the day when he had blackface pictures in his medical school yearbook where one person was in blackface and another was wearing a Ku Klux Klan outfit, so you really couldn't tell who was behind there? Initially, he said, as you guys know, that he was in the picture. He just didn't remember which guy he was, whether he was the Klansman or the guy in the blackface, and then changed his mind and said that, oh, well, actually, I'm not really sure. And we have a clip on that, and here it is.
Tonight, the calls for Governor Ralph Northam to resign are growing, but the Virginia Democrat refusing to step down. The trouble started when this racist photo emerged from his medical school yearbook page. At first, Northam confirmed he was one of the two men in the photo, but the next day...
I believe then and now that I am not either of the people in that photo.
But then Northam admitted he had appeared in blackface once before, during a dance contest in 1984 where he dressed as Michael Jackson.
I had the shoes, I had a glove, and I used just a little bit of shoe polish to put on my cheeks. And the reason I used a very little bit is because I don't know if anybody's ever tried that, but you cannot get shoe polish
Speaking
off.
from experience there.
He can't get shoe polish off. And that, of course, as you know, that's when his wife, when the media said, well, could you do the moonwalk? And he looks down to see how much space there is.
If he's got enough room to do the moonwalk, and his wife taps on the shoulder, no, honey, you can't do that. You can't do that. Oh, my God.
Final thoughts on no excuse absentee voting as the dumbest bill in America and Governor Ralph Northam.
I actually had final thoughts on Governor Ralph Northam. Luckily, the people of Virginia only have him for one term.
Yes.
He can't
cool
run
constitutional
again.
requirement.
Yes, 5 years, and he's done. Secondly, it sounds an awful lot like I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
That's right.
I mean, another well-known Democrat not handling a scandal very well. Why can't you just be honest up front? Why can't you just let people know that you had a problem and come clean? But obviously this guy has a hard time doing that. And the third thing, at least he is following what the legislature wanted him to do, unlike other governors.
Yeah, very true.
Who are just determining we're going to do mail-in elections with no requirements, no law. They're just doing it.
True. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, that's the last thought on Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our millennial, Garrick Ross, and of course, Warren Miller, and our producer, Adam Couture, and our assistant producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and our website. See you next time.